They buried the body of Felagund upon the hilltop of his own isle, and it was clean again, and the green grave of Finrod, Finarfin's son, fairest of all the princes of the Elves, remained inviolate, until the land was changed and broken, and foundered under destroying seas. But Finrod walks with Finarfin his father, beneath the trees in Eldamar. My Golvan and friends, Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today I wanted to take some time to discuss the history of the fairest prince of the Eldar in Middle-earth's history, Finrod Felagund, a true friend of all of the Free Peoples. I'll link some related articles and videos in the description and cards as well that helped in the creation of today's video. Thank you all for joining me today. Let us discuss this valiant elf. Born in Eldamar in the year 1300 of the Years of the Trees, Finrod was the eldest son of Finarfin, son of Finwë, and Eärwen, daughter of Ulwe. Some of his other names were Inguldo, meaning the Noldo, Nom, meaning wisdom, Findarato, likely meaning golden hair champion. And he is also known as Felagund, hewer of caves, a Sindarin adaptation of the Khaz'dul name Filakgundu. For this is what the dwarves called him because of his creation and expansion of the kingdom of Nargothrond, an underground dwelling that we shall discuss more in a bit. He is known for his golden hair, and like the other Eldalie, he was tall and fair. He was the eldest sibling of his brothers Angrod and Aignor, as well as his youngest sister Galadriel. He was like his father Finarfin, for he was both compassionate and noble, and he was friends with all who shared such traits. Thus Finrod opposed the oath of Feanor and his sons, and their deeds concerning the kinslaying of the Falmari, his mother's kindred. Even though Finarfin would end up staying in Valinor and repent along with many of his followers after hearing the doom of the Noldor, Finrod would continue the journey into Middle-earth, for he would not abandon his friends and people to Morgoth the enemy, nor would he subject his people to face the rule of Feanor or the doom alone. But this choice to leave was not an easy one for Finrod surely, for he left behind the only love he would ever know, Amarie, one of the elves of the Vanyar who was not permitted to leave. Thus Finrod went into the east with his kin, and left behind the fair land of his love and early life. He walked with the rear of the host, along with the wisest of his kind, and they often looked back to see their city as they departed from Aman. He brought with him many jewels and treasures from Tirion, one such treasure being the ring that bore the symbol of his house and would one day be called the Ring of Barahir. Since Finrod and his folk were at the back of the host that ultimately followed Fingolfin, they would not participate in the kinslaying, and they would have to cross the Helcaraxe, the frozen land in the far north. But eventually the Noldor returned to Middle-earth. Finrod would come to the river Sirion and the island of Tol Sirion, where he founded the original Minas Tirith, the Tower of the Guard. In year 7 of the First Age, a council in Mithrin would be held where the Noldor would reconcile the burning of the ships at Loskar and their disdain for each other's houses, for Maethros would pass the High Kingship to Fingolfin, his uncle. But Thingol would be discussed, and Caranthir, son of Feanor, would insult the sons of Finarfin, which will come up later. Finrod would then likely go with his people to the Feast of Reuniting in 20 of the First Age. 30 years after this, in 50 of the First Age, Turgon, the best friend and cousin of Finrod, visited him, and the two journeyed southward along the Sirion River. Eventually the two elves came to slumber along the banks of the river, and Ulmo the Vala of the Seas and Waters came up the river, and gave them troubling dreams of what was to come, and these dreams beseeched them to both establish retreats, lest Morgoth should bring armies out of Angband and dominate the armies of the north. And so Finrod and Turgon oft wandered alone, seeking places of hidden strength, for they thought that they were alone in being given such dreams. These dreams would eventually lead to the creation of Nargothrond by Finrod and Gondolin by Turgon. Eventually Finrod and Galadriel would be guests in Doriath. Finrod would be amazed at the halls of Menegroth, the city of King Thingol, and Thingol would tell his new friend Finrod of the caves near the river Narog, and Thingol had some of his elves guide the Noldo to the caves which were to be his new kingdom. Thus Finrod fashioned his kingdom out of the caves with the help of dwarves from the Blue Mountains, but in doing so he displaced any of the petty dwarves that had lived in those relatively unknown caverns. In return for their aid in helping him devise Nargothrond, Finrod gave treasures from Tirion to the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, and they fashioned for him the Nauglamir, a necklace of the jewels of Valinor, that would eventually hold a Silmaril within it. Thus Nargothrond was eventually built, and the dwarves named Finrod Friend, and gave him the title Felagund. Finrod would then give lordship over Minas Tirith to his nephew Orodreth. In living at this new place, Finrod became friends with Círdan the Shipwright, who dwelt south of Nargothrond, and then Finrod built the tower Barad Nimros, Tower of the Whitehorn, upon the Cape of the Falas, to watch against any naval attack from Morgoth that actually would never come, for he would never attack from the sea. At some point, Finrod and his people also built the artificial hill Amon Ethir, the Hill of Spies, to look out over the plains of Talath Durnan. In 60 of the First Age, the Dagor Aglareb would commence, and the Noldor would have victory over Morgoth's forces, pushing them back into Angband, and commencing the siege of Angband. Hence there would come the Long Peace, and so, while peace yet lasted in Middle-earth, Finrod would wander, going into the green woods south of the lands of the sons of Feanor, and he even came into Osiriand, on the eastern edge of Beleriand, and befriended the Green Elves. But not all gladness could last, for the rumors of the kinslaying at Alqualonde eventually reached the ears of Thingol by the messengers of Círdan, and this happened to be at a time when Finrod and his brothers Angrod and Aignor were visiting their sister Galadriel, who stayed behind and lived in Doriath for her love of Celeborn. Thingol grew angry with Finrod, and asked why they came red-handed and guilty into his halls. He was also wrathful to have had the truth hidden from him by his kinsmen for so long. Finrod was troubled, for he was not responsible for any of the egregious things that the followers of Feanor did, but he did not want to single out the lords responsible for such atrocities. But his brother Angrod spoke out against the sons of Feanor, and those that were truly guilty, for he remembered the ill words of Caranthir, one of Feanor's sons, against the sons of Finarfin and Thingol himself. Angrod told Thingol what he should know of the slaying of the people of his brother Olwe. Thingol then made the sons of Finarfin depart his halls, although they could return in the future. For while Thingol was angry of heart, he yet held friendship with the guiltless Noldor, those of the followings of Fingolfin and Finarfin. Thingol expelled the language of Quenya, and thus Sindarin became the common language of the Elves in Beleriand, and Quenya became the language of High Elven lords in private and loremasters. And so, continuing our story, after Nargothrond was full wrought, the children of Finarfin gathered for a feast, and Galadriel asked Finrod why he had not taken a wife. Finrod had great foresight at that time, saying, quote, "An oath I too shall swear, and must be free to fulfill it, and go into darkness. Nor shall anything of my realm endure that a son should inherit." End quote. And as we also know as well, his only love, Amarie, stayed behind in Valinor. Thus Finrod foresaw his doom at the hands of an oath, and also saw that Nargothrond itself and his realm would eventually fall. Thus we move into the latter part of his tale. After more than 300 years in the First Age, Finrod joined Maethros and Maglor on a hunt, and when he grew weary of the chase, he took the dwarf road to the northern part of Osiriand, near the river Askar. That is when he heard singing in a strange tongue. Thus he came across men, the second-born of Ilúvatar, and he was the first elf of Beleriand to do so. Finrod listened to them sing, and he had love for these people. Thus, after they fell into slumber, he took up one of their crude harps, and he played it and sang. The peoples awoke and thought that they were yet in dreams, but eventually they communicated with Finrod, for the powers of the elves extend to the learning of languages also, and Finrod learned theirs quite fast. These men were of the house of Beor, who was yet their leader, and they pledged service to the house of Finarfin, for they became fast friends with Finrod, who they named Nom, and a friend of men. And so Finrod had great love for these people, and he learned of their history and culture, and he was also told of the other houses of men that were yet coming west. Eventually the Green Elves would send word to Finrod, telling him to either have the men go back or pass through their lands, as they did not want men to stay in Osiriand. And so Finrod helped them become situated in Beleriand for a year, and then Beor wished to depart with and serve Finrod for the rest of his mortal years, which he did, earning his name Beor, or vassal. The other men came over the mountains as well, and Finrod would journey to see the Secondborn from time to time. Finrod also took counsel with Thingol concerning these matters, and Thingol granted men land north of Doriath, which is where Beor's people would eventually go. Finrod would also aid Haleth in securing land in Brethil from Thingol, for he brokered a deal that the men of the house of Haleth should live there, and guard the crossings of Teglin from the enemies of the Eldar. Finrod and the woman Andraith would even have conversations about metaphysical differences between men and elves, and the sundered fates between the two kindreds. This tale, called Athrobeth Finrod a Andraith, also tells of Andraith's love for Aignor, the brother of Finrod, and Finrod's explanation of why Aignor had to refuse to return the love. Ultimately, Finrod helped ensure the great history which was to come from the Edain. Eventually, Beor the Old would pass away, and it would be the first experience of mortal death that the Eldar witnessed and had to bear. Years would pass, and eventually the siege of Angband would be broken by Morgoth in the Dagor Bragolok in 455 of the First Age. Thus King Finrod came north from Nargothrond to aid his allies and kin, but he would be cut off from most of his people in the Fen of Sadek with a small company. There, the great elf would have died, or would have been captured by the forces of Morgoth if not for the descendant of Beor, Barahir, and his men who saved the elf, and made a wall of spears about him. And so Finrod made the oath that he had foretold to Galadriel, pledging abiding friendship and aid to Barahir and his kin, and he gave Barahir his ring, which would henceforth be called the Ring of Barahir. The war would go ill for the sons of Feanor in the north, and so Celegorm and Curufin would go to reside in Nargothrond, the halls of their cousin. Now follows events from the tale of Beren and Luthien, which I will cover more in depth in my next two videos, but I shall tell of Finrod's final deeds within it now. In 465 of the First Age, Beren, the son of Barahir, would find his way into Nargothrond with the help of the Ring of Barahir, and he would tell of his quest to retrieve a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth, given to him by Thingol, the father of his love Luthien. Finrod would listen, and he knew that his oath and doom were both at hand, for he knew that the doom of Mandos found its way into his halls. He knew also that Celegorm and Curufin, sons of Feanor who had taken their accursed oath, would be loath to hear of someone else pursuing one of their Silmarils. But nonetheless, Finrod was bound to his oath that he had made to Barahir and his kin, and so he went forth and told his people of his charge. As he had foreseen, Celegorm and Curufin spoke also of their oaths, and the war and ruin that would come to Nargothrond, and their followers listened and were thusly driven by fear. Knowing he was forsaken by his own people, Finrod cast his crown upon the ground and said that they may abandon their oaths to him as his people, but he will not abandon his oath. He asked then for any who remained loyal to him to join him on his quest, and 10 of his friends did so. The chief of the 10 picked up the crown and asked that it be given to a steward until the king's return. That steward would be Finrod's nephew Orodreth, for Minas Tirith had been lost to Morgoth's forces in the north, and Sauron yet dwelt there. And so Finrod, Beren, and the others would all set out towards Angband, and through the powers of Finrod they would all be disguised as orcs. But when they tried to pass by Minas Tirith, Finrod's tower of old that was now named Tol in Gowerhoth, the Isle of Werewolves, Sauron doubted this band of orcs, as they went in haste and did not stop to report their deeds. So he sent to waylay them, and bring them to the isle. And so befell the contest of Finrod and Sauron in songs of power, but Sauron had the mastery. Thus the disguises were broken, and they were revealed, but the names and purposes of the company were not. None of the 12 betrayed their purpose, and so they were imprisoned, and from time to time a werewolf would devour one of the elven companions, and Sauron planned to save Finrod for last, thinking that the truth of the quest laid within him, and perceiving that he was some high elf lord of great power. Sauron was right on that account, for after all the others were slain and the werewolf came for Beren, Finrod used all of his power and might to burst forth from his bonds and slay the beast with hands and teeth, even though it mortally wounded him also. Thus Finrod Felagund, friend of all peoples who had good hearts, passed into shadow to fulfill his oath and save Beren and his quest, which would create the line of people that would save the world in more ways than one. Quote, I go now to my long rest in the timeless halls beyond the seas and the mountains of Aman. It will be long ere I am seen among the Noldor again, and it may be that we shall not meet a second time in death or life, for the fates of our kindreds are apart. Farewell. End quote. After Luthien and Huan rescued Beren and other prisoners from the Isle of Werewolves and expelled Morgoth, Finrod would be buried upon a green hill on his own isle, which was clean again. The prisoners who had been saved from the Isle returned to Nargothrond, and told of the death of Finrod and the heroism of a maiden who did more than the sons of Feanor. And so Finrod's people mourned their king, and turned away from the Feanorians, following Urudreth as their king, and Nargothrond was brought forth from its turmoil. As for Finrod himself, he would not stay within the halls of Mandos, nor was it his true end, for he was allowed resurrection. I'll have to make a video about the resurrection of elves, and my thoughts about it, but ultimately I think Finrod was so selfless and good of nature, even dying to uphold an oath that he had made to another child of Ilúvatar, that he was one of the only elves to ever be brought back. Thus Finrod still walks with his father Finarfin beneath the trees of Eldamar, and he has been returned to the land where his love Amarie dwells. And so ends the tale of Finrod Felagund. From the story of Finrod, we see the power of pure and compassionate friendship. This elf is so revered and loved by all, for he understood and loved the cultures of so many folk, men, elves, dwarves, and others alike. We should all strive to be so kind and understanding in nature. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this longer video. If you did, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on Finrod Felagund? Every time I read more about this character, I like him even more. He has to be one of, if not my favorite elf from Tolkien's Legendarium, just because of his kindness and compassion. Let me know your opinions about him in the comments below. Also, please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon for a podcast and Discord server in the description below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. As I alluded to earlier, we are going to keep this Silmarillion theme of videos going with my retelling of the tale of Beren and Luthien. It is past time for me to remake this video and to tell it in a better way, as it was one of my oldest videos, and it deserves as much justice as I can give it. For me to do that, I think I will have to divide the content up into 2 videos, as I have done with the other great tales. And that way I may continue forward with my timeline of Arda series that is waiting for the retelling of this tale. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining me through these many adventures. It is such an honor to have you all along with me, and thank you for joining me on this adventure specifically. Until the next one, my great friends.